Our guest this week on Veterans Chronicles is Lieutenant Colonel Harry Stewart. He's a World War II veteran and a member of the famed Tuskegee Airmen. He's also a recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross, and after the war even earned Top Gun honors. And Colonel Stewart, a great pleasure to have you with us. Thank you.
Pleasure meeting you, Greg.
Where were you born and raised, sir?
I was born in Newport News, Virginia on July 4th, 1924. My parents moved the family to New York when I was 2 years old, and I was raised with most of my socialization in New York City. And after that, during my working years, I worked throughout the country here and finally settled in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, where I live at present.
Fantastic. Now, did you have an interest in flying as a young boy?
Oh, very, very much so. You know, during the 1930s, that were real years for the beginning of aviation as we know it today. And I followed all of the pilots that were flying at the time and the different aircraft they had and that type of thing. And I vowed at a very early age that I'd try my best to become a pilot and maybe fly in the airlines. The war came along, and it was so happened I was fortunate enough to pass the examination for the Aviation Cadet Corps and went to Tuskegee Army Flying School down in Tuskegee, Alabama, and went from there for 7 years in the service as a pilot.
What was it like when you got to Tuskegee?
Well, of course, at a youngster of 18 years old, I was wide-eyed and awestruck by all of the things I saw. I had not been to college yet, and down in Tuskegee, the field that we were on was sort of paired off with the college down there, Tuskegee Institute. I did live on the college campus for about 6 months, so I had my first experience as far as the education is concerned on a college campus. And it was just a very, very pleasurable experience. And when I say experience, I mean these were newfound experiences for me, and quite a thing for a youngster at 18 years old.
What did you notice about the caliber of the members of your unit?
Well, I was awestruck by them also, because I had never met a group like this before, and with so much talent within the group itself. And the talent was broad-ranged. There were youngsters like me who were 18 years old, who had not yet been to college or finished college, up to more grown-ups or older who had their degrees, and quite an experience there.
And when you were done, were you ready to go?
I was ready to go, looking forward to it, and I was sent from Tuskegee to Walterboro, South Carolina for some more training in fighter aircraft, and then eventually, and that was in November of 1944, was sent over to Italy to join the Red Tails, the 332nd Fighter Group, and from there I flew 43 combat missions and then back home.
What was the first one like? You've done all this training, you're confident, you're eager to join the fight, you're eager to prove yourselves as a unit, I know, but then you meet the enemy. What's it like?
Well, awestruck at first. We were on a mission to someplace in Germany. I don't remember the exact target at the time, that we were to escort a group of bombers to the target and back. This was my first mission, and it was sort of a learning curve for me. I'd never been on a mission like that before, and to see that number of bombers and to see the number of fighters and to flying into the enemy territory there, it was, I was just awestruck by it all. But it wasn't more than 3 or 4 missions that I got acclimated to the sequence of things.
What were you flying?
I was flying P-51s at the time there. I started out flying the earlier model P-51B, and then I got the P-51C, and then eventually one of the P-51Ds, the latest model. That's the one with the bubble canopy.
P-51, I'm pretty sure, is the favorite fighter plane of the bomber crews as well. They must have been very appreciative of the help, because I know earlier in the war they didn't have the escorts.
Exactly. And this way we could, escort them for long distances, and, I can remember the longest range distance that the 332nd went on. I wasn't on that particular mission itself, but it was from Foggia, Italy to Berlin, and that was a 1,600-mile round trip, and that was quite a distance. It was about a 6.5-hour round trip for the guys in the fighter planes, and much more than that for the guys who were in the bomber aircraft.
Now, with the bomber crews, were they friendly towards you, or was there still a little bit of standoff separation?
I think they were friendly and appreciative. I'm not too sure that all of them knew exactly who we were at the time there. All they knew was that these were friendly fighters that were helping them out. But as far as being an all African-American fighter group there, I don't think that all of them really knew that's who was escorting them at the time.
How would you describe the caliber of the Germans in terms of in the air or anti-aircraft fire from the ground? Were they fierce at that point or pretty well beat down?
In the air, when I got over there, they were pretty well beat down, I think, and they had lost quite a few pilots at the time there, even though there were some with formidable experiences that could do a lot of damage to the efforts that we were putting up there. But I think it was during the earlier part of the war, and that the groups met the earlier pilots with who lived through much more experience, and the attrition actually had taken most of their experienced pilots. The ground fire was still very, very accurate, and that was intense going over the targets there. And of course, that was the biggest danger to the bomber aircraft, was the anti-aircraft fire. The fighter pilots, we did not experience the anti-aircraft fire as much, because when they went in on the target, we pulled off to the side to let the bombers go into the target there, and we picked them up after they came off of the target to escort them back home again.
You mentioned that you flew 43 missions.
Yes.
As part of the Red Tails in World War II, and 3 different times you shot down the enemy. So let's take those one at a time. What happened on the first engagement?
Well, they were all on one engagement there, and what had happened is I shot down 2 aircraft. They were FW-190, Focke-Wulf 190, and a third one I was given credit for, and he was on my tail, and he had me in his sights there, but what had happened there was, I believe he over-controlled, and he crashed into the ground, and I was given credit for that as 3 aircraft.
Well, that was different. I mean, what was your reaction when this happened? Was it, oh my goodness, this is happening, and I have to rely on my instincts here? What's going through your mind?
Here again, rely on the past training I had and my instincts there, and of course, I sort of surprised the 2 that I shot down there, but then I saw these tracers come around me, and it was the one that crashed into the ground, and I thought sure I was going to get knocked down and hit by that one that was behind me, but fortunately he either over-controlled or has some type of a problem, but he went into the ground, and I was home free at that time.
And so you mentioned using your instincts. In a situation like that, as an expert pilot, obviously as a Top Gun pilot, you're better than most. Do you have a sense in your mind of what maneuvers work best for you, or is it all about reading your opponent?
Well, it's all about reading the opponent and taking what advantages that you may have at the time there. There's an advantage in the airspeed, or can be an advantage in the airspeed, can be an advantage in the altitude, and of course an advantage in surprise. And I think that the advantage that I had at the time was surprise more than anything else.
Mr. Stewart, one of the things that Harold Brown just told us, he was in here just before you, because he was shot down, and he said to ask you about the story of your wingman, because what happened to Harold Brown was, unfortunately, he was rescued by a constable in the town where he was
Yes.
where he was grabbed, it wasn't the same for your wingman. What happened there?
Well, there were the flight that I was in at the time there were 7 of us. And of that 7, 2 were shot down in the dogfight that we were in, and 1 was shot up badly enough that on the way back home he had to make an emergency landing in one of the islands off of Yugoslavia. But 2 of the pilots that shot down, 1 was killed immediately. The other pilot that was with me that got shot down, he bailed out successfully, but he was picked up by citizens of Austria. This was near Vienna, Austria. However, 2 days later, a mob broke into the jail that they had him in and took him out and lynched him, hung him from a lamppost. That was the date that happened was April 1st, 1945. And I was recently, in the past 6 months, over in Austria, invited over by the Austrian government, who was commemorating the services of that pilot that I just mentioned that was shot down and then executed by this mob. So I thought that was wonderful of the government to go ahead and commemorate him as such, and there's a permanent memorial to him overseas there. My wingman, who I had there, he was able to stay with me through most of the skirmish there. He lost me for a while, but then caught up with me, and we both got back home together all right.
What were you thinking as the war ended and you made it home? You're on some level equal partners with these bomber crews. Then you get back home, and not a lot has changed.
Not a lot has changed. It was, the same old as far as the social problems were concerned in the States. When the war was first over there, I thought that I would be going over to the Asian theater to Japan to fight the war there, but the A-bomb came along and put an end to that. So as a result, I went home in October of 1945. The group that I was in was reactivated, and I spent another few years up at Lockbourne Air Force Base in Columbus, Ohio, and I got out of the service in January 1st of 1950. So that was my service as far as the service was concerned. I tried and I applied for a couple of airlines at the time there, but I was not hired, and the reason was that they were not hiring any African-American pilots or crew members at the time within any airlines in the States. Happy to say that that's been changed completely now, and we have pilots and all of the African-American pilots and all of the airlines in the United States.
Definitely. Well, before you left the service, as I mentioned earlier, you won the Top Gun competition. So what happened there?
Well, General Hoyt Vandenberg in 1948 decided he wanted to resurrect a competition that was held before World War II that they called, and it's equivalent to what the Navy calls the Top Gun, and it was referred to as the Continental Gunnery Meet or the Army Air Corps Gunnery Meet, that type of thing. But anyway, he resurrected it, and he asked that 3 pilots be selected from each of the fighter groups in the country at the time there. There were 12 fighter groups that were selected. 7 of these groups were jet groups, and 5 of them were regular piston fighter plane groups. I was with the piston fighter planes group flying P-47 Thunderbolts. We won the team score out of all of the people in the piston group there. So it was quite a feather in our cap as far as the 332nd was concerned. And I think it put any end to any doubt in people's mind as far as the ability of the Tuskegee Airmen were concerned, as far as flying was concerned.
So did they calibrate the scores slightly differently between the jets and the pistons?
No. The only reason they differentiated them is that the jets at that time were not equipped to fire rockets, and the piston planes were firing rockets. So of all of the events there were 6 events for the piston planes and 5 events for the jet class. So it wasn't comparing apples to apples. So what they did was they had a winning group as far as the jet class was concerned, and a winning group as far as the piston class was concerned.
So you mentioned you left the service in 1950.
Yes.
By that time, the United States military was integrated.
Yes.
And I would guess, and I think a lot of people have said since then, that the performance and the conduct of the Tuskegee Airmen played a major role in that. So what did that mean to you to see that just a few years later?
Well, yes, I think that meant a great deal, and there was a trial period, I think, that we wanted to see if the Air Force would really enforce what they said and meant what they said as far as integration was concerned, and it turned out to be they did a very good job as far as integrating the service was concerned. There was, no discrimination as far as the job requirements and the job offers and the job performances were concerned there. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know which the case may be, but I had gotten out of the service then, and the reason being is that they had what they call a RIF, a reduction in force, and they decided that they would eliminate 25,000 officers from the Air Force at the time. I tried to find out, why they picked me and how some of these 25,000 were picked. And of course, like me, who was just a recent high school graduate, had no college training whatsoever, but there were others who were in the service there who did have college training and college degrees. And I think on the performance or an evaluation of the credentials of the individuals, I think they took those that were limited as far as the education was concerned and put them in the lower category group for discharge. Not that they didn't appreciate those guys and those youngsters who came in there without the college degrees there, but it was a budgetary type of thing at the time, and they had to eliminate 25,000 pilots at the time.
That's interesting, given the performance you'd already displayed, and also the fact it happened in 1950.
1950, yes.
Right when we're going to war.
And it was just before the Korean War. That's right.
Interesting
yes.
timing.
I realized when I got out of the service that I was limited to a certain extent as far as my future jobs were concerned by the education that I had and the qualifying education that I had there. So I decided that I would go back to school. So I did go back to school, and I went to New York University College of Engineering, and eventually got my Bachelor of Science degree in mechanical engineering. And once I did that, I really liked the vocation of engineering there, and I decided that I would not reapply to go back in the service. I stayed in the civilian group, and I rose up the ladder there and ended up as vice president of a oil and gas consortium in Detroit, Michigan.
A couple of questions before we let you go. Where do you see, we talked about the role of the Tuskegee Airmen in desegregating the military, but obviously there's been other major milestones in civil rights since then, 1964 and 1965 and so forth, and obviously even more so after that.
Yes.
What role do you think the Tuskegee Airmen played in advancing the cause?
I think it was one of the deciding factors to convince others that, yes, there could be integration within all of the facets of the country without having some type of adverse reaction from it. In fact, it probably would be good for the country because it was taking their overall talent that they had in the African American community and melding them with the talent with the rest of the country there, and I think it turned out to be an overall enhancement for the country itself.
And finally, I know from interviewing a number of Tuskegee Airmen how important it is to so many of you to speak to public groups and especially to kids in schools. What message do you want to convey to young people in particular, and I guess even more specifically to young African American students?
Yes, to don't despair, and you may find that the road is difficult toward attaining what you want as far as an avocation is concerned, but don't despair and pursue a course of excellence as far as your studies are concerned. Don't grab hold of the lesser studies that you have there. Be proficient in your math and your sciences, and be able to communicate, learn your communication skills very well and that type of thing, and then go out into the neighborhood and present yourselves, and I'm sure that you'll get just rewards for that.
You always hoped that Tuskegee Airmen would get respect. Did you ever think you'd be revered in the way that you are now?
No, I didn't. I thought that, that was a passing phase in my life there as far as the war was concerned and the Tuskegee Airmen exploits, and I didn't for one moment think that we would get to see some of the accolades and some of the responses to the performance that we had in later years that we have already.
Anything else you'd like to add, sir?
No, that's about it. As you know, I can say that it's been a blessing for me as far as my life is concerned. 94 years old now, and I wouldn't have changed any of it for anything. It's been a beautiful odyssey travel for me through life, and as I said, I wouldn't change one thing.
Well, sir, it's an honor to meet you. Thank you for your service to our country, and thank you for your time with us here today.
Well, thank you very much.
U.S. Army Air Corps and U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Harry Stewart, World War II veteran and member of the famed Tuskegee Airmen. I'm Greg Corombos. This is Veterans Chronicles.